But we begin tonight with Donald Trump and New York Attorney General Letitia James, together for the first time in a New York City courtroom. Today was the first day of the civil fraud trial over charges that Trump, along with his two adult sons and his business, grossly inflated the value of his assets for years. Attorney General James, who was not arguing the case today, did have a front row seat. Presiding is Judge Arthur Engoron, who just last week delivered the bombshell ruling finding Trump liable for fraud, claiming that Trump's defenses of his real estate valuations were based in, quote, a fantasy world. The trial is expected to last until just before Christmas, with six more causes of action to be determined about the scope of the fraud, with a focus on the intent by Trump, his family members, and business associates to commit the fraud. In their opening statement, the prosecution said that they have the receipts to prove that the defendants made these false declarations to intentionally defraud the banks and insurance companies. The prosecutors used some of the depositions with Don Jr., Eric, and former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg to make that point. Trump's lawyers are holding to their claims that not only is Trump nothing less than a super successful and wealthy real estate developer tycoon, but that there could not have been any intent to defraud because there was no fraud, no false statements, and no such thing as an objective valuation of a property. And while Trump is not expected to be present throughout the trial, he, along with Don Jr., Ivanka, and Eric, are on the witness list, and we do expect to see them testify at some point under oath. Beyond the $250 million in penalties that New York AG Letitia James is seeking, this trial could also likely put an end to the entire Trump Organization in New York. It will also completely shatter whatever remains of the myth of Trump as an extremely wealthy and successful businessman. You know, the original big lie that helped propel him into the White House in 2016. That point has not been lost on Trump, who was lashing out once again at the judge and the attorney general in this case.
We have a rogue judge, a racist attorney general who's a horror show. This judge is a politician, and he should be investigated for what he's done. These are corrupt people we're dealing with, the most corrupt people. When you have a radical left attorney general like Letitia James, who's a disgrace to our country, this rogue judge, a Trump hater, he's a Democrat operative. This judge should be disbarred. He shouldn't be allowed to be a judge.
That police officer is everyone right now. Joining me now is NBC's Adam Reese, who's in the courtroom today, Tim O'Brien, senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion, and Mary McCord, former acting assistant attorney general for national security and co-host of the MSNBC podcast, Prosecuting Donald Trump. Adam Reese, I was noting the police officer at the front and was standing in the foreground in that image. He was holding his composure very well, but you could kind of almost see what was going on inside of his mind. What was going on in the courtroom? Give us sort of the color of the courtroom and Donald Trump's demeanor, because he seemed angry.
He was very angry. And, Joy, as you just heard, there was no love lost between Donald Trump and Attorney General Letitia James, and for that matter, Judge Engoron. When Mr. Trump came into the courtroom numerous times, he totally avoided Letitia James making eye contact. She also avoided him. She looked away, looked to her left as he came in from the right. He seemed angry at times, agitated. He was repeatedly consulting with his attorneys on both sides of him. He looked beet red at times, heated. He was looking at a particular article. When the first witness took the stand, he really was taking issue with a lot of what he was saying. But the opening statements were more of the same from both sides. A lot of what we have heard in all of the lead up to this trial, the prosecution saying all of Trump's properties here in New York were overvalued. We're not just talking about a couple million here or there. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. He overestimated his net worth, anywhere between $800 and $2.2 billion. The defense came up. They said he is an incredibly successful businessman. These are trophy properties. No one got hurt. In fact, the banks made some $100 million. The insurers weren't hurt. The first witness, as I mentioned, Donald Bender, Trump's longtime accountant at Mazars. He testified to a lot of detailed accounting throughout the afternoon. But at the very end of the day, Judge Engoron said, a lot of this 2011 valuations seem to be redundant, and we could be wasting our time, at which point Trump jumped up with a double thumbs up, and his attorney, Chris Kise, said, I couldn't agree with you more, Judge.
What a circus. Let me just play, just to remind everyone why we're here. This is Michael Cohen. This was him testifying in 2019 to Congress, and this is what led to this case happening at all.
To your knowledge, did the president or his company ever inflate assets or revenues?
Yes.
To your knowledge, did the president ever provide inflated assets to an insurance company?
Yes.
Do you know, to your knowledge, was the president interested in reducing his local real estate bills, tax bills?
Yes.
And how did he do that?
What you do is you deflate the value of the asset, and then you put in a request to the tax department for a deduction.
And was that done with the president's knowledge or direction?
Everything was done with the knowledge and at the direction of Mr. Trump.
That is why we are here, Tim O'Brien. And that gentleman is going to be testifying, Michael Cohen, who was Donald Trump's lawyer, for a long time, more than a decade. Also will be testifying as somebody that you told me the name of, and that I didn't watch The Apprentice, so I didn't know who he was. Alan Weisselberg, who we had some VO of him. I think he was on The Apprentice once in 2006. He was Trump's business guy, and you know a lot about him. So those are going to be two of the main witnesses besides Trump's kids. And you would know probably better than anyone else. They know what he did. Alan Weisselberg and Michael Cohen both have been to prison because of Donald Trump. So they know what they're talking about. And Weisselberg, to stay out of prison, has got to tell the truth. Your thoughts, Tim?
Well, I'll tell you a little story about Alan Weisselberg, Joy. I went over to Trump Tower in 2005 when Donald was asserting that the total value of all of his holdings were $6 billion. And I had sources around him who knew his finances intimately that said that it was a fraction of that amount, well less than $1 billion. So when I went to visit with Alan Weisselberg, the point of the exercise was for them to go through all of his assets and prove to me that it added up to $6 billion. And I was there for most of an afternoon. Alan was sitting across the table from me with a yellow legal pad. Actually, we're sitting in chairs facing one another. He gave me all the valuations. At the end of it, I took out my calculator and I added it up. And I said, Alan, this only adds up to $5 billion. And he looked perplexed for a minute and he goes, I'm going to go to my office and I'm going to find that other billion. And that's basically how these guys rolled day to day forever. Trump inflated his wealth because he is a deeply insecure person about his own business prowess and his own track record. He saw it as a scorecard that he used to compare himself to other wealthy people in the United States. That's why he always lobbied Forbes to try to be at the top of their list. But it also served a business purpose, as we know. It put him in front of bankers who might not otherwise have been dealing with him. And he got away with that for a long time because I think the media treated it like a game. Law enforcement didn't see any harm in it. And bankers during a certain period of time, I think, were afraid to take him on because he would savage them in the press. Ultimately, they just all washed their hands of him because he was a serial bankruptcy artist and he did not make good on a number of these loans, multi-billion-dollar loans he never paid back, and walked away from him. And I think what you're seeing in this courtroom right now is decades of this. Donald Trump started doing this in the 1970s. He's a 77-year-old man who is finally being held to account for behavior that he got away with for a long time because no one cared until he became president. And I think all of this amounts to an unraveling of his family's business roots in New York. I don't think he's going to stay in business in New York. I think fraud is a foregone conclusion right now. The judge has already ruled on this. All we're talking about now are the scale of the penalties that are going to be assessed against him. And he is not acting like someone who thinks he has a good story to tell. He is acting like someone who's cornered and caged and afraid, and he's lashing out at the judge, and he's lashing out at Letitia James. And I think it's because he feels he's got nowhere else to go. I think the other thing to be cognizant of is he rose to fame and public attention around this idea that he was a self-made entrepreneurial genius, and then he became a television celebrity. He's a shapeshifter, and he has now transitioned away from being a businessman into being the leader of a political cult. And I think when he's making these appeals in the courtroom, it's not as a businessman. He's trying to appeal to his political base because he knows he's already had it in this courtroom, I think.